The early morning sun burned low over the dusty plains, painting the auction yard in streaks of golden red. A line of wagons and riders encircled the crude wooden platform where townsfolk had gathered, voices rising in excitement and greed. Rancher McAllister's daughter, Emily, stood on the platform, her hands tied to a post, her wide eyes scanning the crowd for some hint of mercy. She was only 18, barely grown, yet the tension on her face betrayed the years of isolation and fear she had endured since her father's misfortune had left them nearly bankrupt. The auctioneer, a wiry man with a voice like gravel, paced the stage with a gavel in hand, his eyes gleaming with anticipation as he called out to the highest bidder. "Ladies and gentlemen, here we have a fine young lady, strong and healthy, the pride of the McAllister Ranch. Who'll start the bidding?" A rough murmur went through the crowd, some men smirking, others shuffling nervously. Emily's stomach twisted as she glanced at her father standing nearby, his head bowed, unable to meet her gaze. He had lost everything in a drought and a string of bad deals, and now this humiliating sale was meant to pay off debts he could not hope to cover otherwise. She tried to swallow her fear, but the pounding of her heart drowned out every other sound. Then a sudden movement at the edge of the crowd caught her eye. A tall figure on horseback, dressed in the deep browns and reds of the Lakota, rode steadily toward the auction site. The crowd parted instinctively, sensing something unusual. His eyes, dark and unwavering, met hers for the briefest moment, and Emily felt an unfamiliar spark of hope. The auctioneer, noticing the rider, waved a hand impatiently. "Hey, this ain't your business, stranger. Move along." The Lakota warrior dismounted with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to the plains, his long hair tied back, beads glinting in the sunlight. Without a word, he stepped onto the wooden platform, his gaze locking on Emily, and then, slowly, he raised a hand. The murmurs in the crowd turned to whispers, then to nervous laughter. "What is this? You think you can just steal her away?" one of the bidders shouted. The warrior's voice, calm but commanding, cut through the chaos. "She is not for sale. Not to you, not to anyone." Some men laughed at his words, but others fell silent, sensing the weight in his tone. He drew a long, curved knife from his belt and held it up as if it were a symbol of defiance. "Step back, all of you. One step closer and I'll make you regret it." A hush fell over the yard. Even the auctioneer seemed uncertain, gripping the gavel as if it could shield him. Emily's father shook his head, pleading silently with the man to walk away, but the Lakota warrior's focus never wavered. "My people honor strength and freedom," he said, his voice carrying across the yard. "She has neither freedom nor choice here. I will not allow it." Then, in a move that stunned everyone, he reached down and cut the ropes binding Emily's wrists. She stumbled, catching herself against the post, and he offered her his hand. Her pulse raced as she hesitated, the fear of defiance battling with a desperate need to escape. Finally, she grasped his hand, and together they leapt off the platform, landing in the dusty sand with a clatter that sent the crowd gasping. Men scrambled forward, shouts and curses echoing, but the warrior's horse was already waiting. With a swift motion, he swung Emily into the saddle before mounting himself, and in a blur of hooves and dust, they vanished across the plains. The auction yard erupted in chaos. Guns were drawn, men cursed their impotence, and the auctioneer shook his fist, but the warrior had already melted into the horizon, a solitary figure racing toward freedom. Emily clutched the reins tightly, her breath coming in short gasps. Who are you?" she managed to ask over the pounding of the hooves. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Someone who knows what it means to protect what is right," he said, his gaze forward. The wind whipped her hair across her face, stinging her eyes, but for the first time that day, Emily felt alive, unbound not only by ropes but by fear itself. Night fell, and they made camp under the wide sky, the stars a tapestry of silver and indigo stretching endlessly above the plains. Emily sat beside the small fire, still trembling from the morning's events, while the Lakota warrior arranged the horses and checked the edges of the camp for threats. "Why did you help me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, the firelight casting shadows across her face. He crouched beside her, his expression solemn. "Because no one should be sold like cattle. Because your life is yours, and you deserve to choose how it will be lived." Emily's mind raced, trying to reconcile the audacity of his actions with the reality of their situation. She was a rancher's daughter, raised on rules and obedience, yet here she was, sitting beside a man who had broken every rule for her sake. Won't they come after us? She asked, fear creeping back. They might try, he admitted. But the land is wide, and I know its secrets. We can stay ahead if we are careful. Silence settled between them for a moment, broken only by the crackling of the fire. Emily's chest heaved as she realized she could finally breathe, free from the suffocating presence of men who would see her as property rather than a person. As the night deepened, the warrior told her stories of his people, the Lakota, their traditions, their courage, and their unwavering sense of justice. Emily listened, captivated by the richness of a world she had never known, feeling a connection not only to him but to the land itself, vast and untamed, yet full of possibility. The stars wheeled overhead as she began to feel a strange sense of belonging, a feeling she had never experienced in her sheltered life on the ranch. By mid-morning, they were on horseback again, the horizon stretching endlessly, promising both danger and sanctuary. The warrior guided Emily to a hidden valley, shielded by jagged cliffs and dense groves of trees. The valley was alive with the hum of nature, birds, streams, and the whispering wind, far removed from the greed and corruption of the auction yard. This place will keep you safe for now, he said, dismounting with practiced ease. Emily followed, her legs weak from the long ride, yet her spirit lightened with every step. Thank you, she whispered, almost shyly, the weight of gratitude pressing down on her. The warrior shook his head. No thanks needed. You must learn to stand for yourself, Emily. Freedom is as much about courage as it is about protection. Emily watched him move among the trees, preparing traps and scouting the surroundings. She felt a surge of admiration, mixed with a strange fascination. How can you be so fearless? She asked, hesitant. Because I know who I am, he said simply, meeting her gaze. And I know what is worth defending. She thought of her father, still trapped in the humiliation of the auction yard, and a pang of sorrow shot through her chest. Yet, watching the warrior, she realized that courage was contagious. She could feel it awakening within her, stirring alongside a growing sense of self-worth. As the sun climbed, casting long shadows across the valley, Emily helped him gather water and prepare food. Their movements became coordinated, almost instinctual, and she began to sense a rhythm to survival, a dance of trust and mutual respect. In that moment, she understood that her life had shifted irrevocably. She was no longer a passive participant, a commodity to be bought and sold. She was alive, fully and fiercely, in a world that demanded strength but also offered beauty in return. The warrior watched her, noting the subtle changes, the straightening of her shoulders, the fire in her eyes. He nodded slightly, approvingly. You are stronger than you know, he said. And soon, you will see it too. Emily smiled, a small, tentative thing, but it carried the weight of newfound hope. I want to learn, she said, her voice steady now. Teach me. The warrior's smile widened, rare and genuine. Then you shall learn. And when the time comes, you will defend not just yourself, but others who cannot defend themselves. Hours passed in quiet training, walking the ridge lines, learning the signs of the land, and sharing stories of courage and loss. Emily's mind, once consumed by fear, was now alive with possibility. She realized that her life was no longer dictated by auctioneers or creditors, but by her own choices and the guidance of someone who respected her as an equal. The bond between them grew not through words alone, but through shared purpose, trust, and the unspoken promise of protection. As the day waned, the warrior led Emily to a vantage point overlooking the valley. You see, he said, gesturing to the horizon where the sun touched the edge of the plains, the world is wide, and there are many paths. Some are dangerous, but some are yours to claim. Emily's eyes filled with tears, not of fear, but of awe and gratitude. She had been saved, yes, but more importantly, she had been awakened to a life she had never imagined. Standing there, wind in her hair, the plains stretching infinitely before her, she felt the first stirrings of freedom deep in her soul. I will never forget this, she said softly. The warrior placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. Nor should you. Remember this feeling, Emily. It will guide you when the world tries to tell you who you are. You are more than anyone's auction or debt. You are yourself, and that is worth fighting for. As darkness fell, the two figures silhouetted against the fading sun, the valley embraced them in quiet secrecy, a haven for the beginning of a life redefined. Emily looked out over the plains, her heart steady, her spirit resolute. She was no longer the rancher's daughter at auction. She was a young woman who had been given a choice, and she would carry the courage of the Lakota warrior with her, forever. Freedom was no longer an abstract dream, it was hers to claim, and nothing would ever take it from her again.